compared to the medicines we have now, which all have side effects, which all are appropriate for certain populations, cannabis is a slam dunk. The evidence to support it in many applications, even if it's just for feeling better, even if it's just for sleeping better. But I'm saying more than that, even for specific illnesses, the disease process of certain illnesses like diabetes, cannabis can be amazing.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of The Dime. I'm Brian Fields, and with me, as always, is Kellen Finney. And this week, we got a very special guest, Dr. Benjamin Caplan, author and founder of CED Clinic. Dr. Caplan, thanks for taking the time. How are you doing today?
Thanks, Brian. Good to be here. Things are good. I'm really excited for what'll be a great conversation.
Excited to dive in. Kellen, how are you doing?
I'm doing really well. Really excited to talk to Dr. Caplan. Really excited to kind of dive into all of his work in the medical field and, all the good things he's doing out there. And, it's nice to connect with someone who's got his heart on the West Coast. I know his wife's on the West Coast. His early academic career was spent on the West Coast. So how are you doing, Brian?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think we can all say that our heart is all on the West Coast. And Dr. Caplan, exactly as Kellen said.
Hang on. Somewhere in the middle here.
We just need to put you on the record physically.
Look at them trying to pull me in.
Are you located on the East Coast or the West Coast, Dr. Caplan?
I am physically on the East Coast, but my heart is in the West Coast. So I am bi-coastal. I got love to go around.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a very fair record. So looking forward to diving in. Let's get right into it. So can you give a little background about yourself and how you found your way into cannabis?
Sure. So I'm a traditional doctor. I'm a primary care doctor, board certified, licensed, trained. I'm not the quacky sort that gives kind of funky hanging things off the ceiling. I care about evidence. I care about academia, and I care most about my patients. So my career started off in some of the academic centers of Boston that we all know about from the news and some elite universities. But I hear my patients, and I heard my patients calling out for guidance with cannabis, and they didn't have any. It's just mostly card flippers out there and the bud tenders at the stores that don't know much, beyond what they're selling. So I decided to do what felt right, which was fill that need for academic understanding of the literature and translating that to my patients so that they can make, healthy decisions for themselves.
I'm always fascinated early on in your career. Did you always been a proponent of cannabis, or did you read something, or did someone say something to you that got you started? And can you share a little bit more of that literature?
You asked me if I smoked a lot of weed. Is that really what we're boiling down to? Yeah.
Not as necessarily. More so, were you one that was more like pro utilization of these type of tools, or did you read a scientific literature that said, hey, maybe this could help my patient?
Right. So I am a nerd through and through, and I actually never consumed cannabis. I was afraid of it. The same stuff I hear my patients telling me all the time now, like they're worried about becoming dumb or becoming lazy, or, they don't know what THC is going to do. I was subject to the same idiotic misinformation that everybody else was, even through medical school. I mean, I literally knew nothing. Of course, I had friends who had a good time with it and they seemed happy, and, it was saving them from drinking alcohol. So that seemed like a positive, in my youth, but I didn't know anything personally, apart from, people having a good time and Bob Marley seeming like he was pretty creative, and that was it. So all of my learning happened because I opened books. I read what is publicly available, the published literature from legitimate channels, and the story is overwhelming. It's actually really positive, but nobody's learning about it. Doctors aren't changing their views based on what they're reading, or maybe they're not reading. And there's no kind of leadership on the medical side for cannabis. I mean, there are a couple pot docs out there who smoke a lot and say some good things. Maybe they use some fancy language, but there's nobody really reaching the public and trying to get everybody on the same page, which is my mission.
Was there like a critical point though, where prior you were just kind of dabbling in the research, and then finally you're like, all right, this is it. I'm gonna get involved. I'm gonna get to the front lines. Like, what was that critical point?
No, I mean, so
like
my dad is an icon of neurology. When you think about strokes and stroke neurology, that's my dad. I mean, he's published upwards of 50 books, 300 manuscripts. Like, he is the guru. Literally this year, Time Magazine called him the GOAT of medicine, not even just neurology, but he's a badass when it comes to neurology. So I grew up in a long shadow. I knew I wanted to be like him and lead something, but God, what am I going to do? So there was part of that, like a business drive to like, what can I find my niche? But really, it was patients in my office. Like, I don't know if you know this, but doctors from time to time face a week of all the same stuff. Like for whatever reason, the stars are aligned. Everybody has a sore throat or everybody has a broken elbow. And it was 1 week in my office in the suburbs of Boston where everybody was like, doc, I don't need your stuff. I have cannabis. And I'm sitting across the table. I'm supposed to be the one who knows it all. And I'm thinking, boy, I don't know anything. Like these patients don't need, for back pain, for menstrual cramping, for headaches, for muscle pains. I have one professional athlete who uses it after practice. Like I am clueless. And that felt really awful, but it also motivated me to learn more.
So was there a piece of literature you went to? Because this is where like the nerdy aspect is really, really fascinating, because you went to somewhere, you saw a journal, a published article, and that like led you on to this discovery where you started understanding, hey, cannabis can be this tool. Was there a specific piece, and do you remember exactly what that was?
Right. So I teach people not to look at one piece. That if you're ever reading, you have to read, especially in medicine, you have to read at least 4 or 5 articles about the same topic, because you're not going to see the same story. That's the way good medicine research happens. You have something on A, and then you have something counter A. You have something on B and counter B. So for me, it was PubMed, which is publicly available. Anybody can search there. And I looked for the free articles because at the time I couldn't afford to pay for articles. And you know what I did? I actually started downloading as much as I could. And I built what has now become the world's largest library of cannabis publications, the CED library. And I give that for free. It's literally my 2 terabyte Google Drive that I share for anybody who wants to search and read about this stuff without cost. It's there to be read.
So have you seen a drastic change as a sentiment publicly since that first moment where you got started to kind of where we are today?
Oh my God. Yeah. And I've watched it sort of incrementally change. Like 12 years ago, nobody talked about it. It was just something you didn't do. Like, I'm not going to become a prostitute. I'm not going to consume cannabis. Like, it was just this crazy thing. Like, I don't want to shoot up heroin, so why would I do cannabis? It was like an automatic idiocy. And that evolved to something like a don't ask, don't tell. Like, you didn't tell your doctor and your doctor didn't ask, and everybody kind of hushed about it, but it wasn't so negative. And that evolved to, well, if you're going to do it, I don't really know what to tell you. That was the doctor's line. Like, they're just clueless, but go have fun and be safe. And that eventually changed to what we have now, which is I actually get referrals from some of the pain doctors out there, from some of the doctors who have just complicated patients that they can't see and they don't really understand what to do with. They send them to me first because people are finding such relief with cannabis across the spectrum. And these doctors out there don't really understand why. Like, none of us were taught about it in medical school. They don't get the physiology of what's happening at a cellular level with cannabis. That's good. I mean, we all still hear the stigma for some reason. Maybe it's the grandmothers out there have a loud voice saying, "Oh, don't you do that." But cannabis is really helping people. And when someone gets out of their comfort zone, gives it a try, maybe because they heard their neighbor or someone they know had cancer and they tried it, when people give this product a try, they're all bowled over, overwhelmed with benefit. And it's shocking because we don't have much information about it culturally.
I think one interesting thing that when we've talked to a couple guests about this is that the cannabinoid system isn't taught in medical school, right? And so I know there's been a lot of research. At what point do you think that's going to change, I guess, right?
I don't know. I mean, this is sort of an introduction to the intersection of payment. So how medical schools are businesses and they're funded by rich people who have very particular opinions. So if those opinions are hard to change, it's hard to get the curriculum to change. I've literally knocked on the door of my alma maters and they're not so interested. I mean, I give talks once in a while and I share as much as I can in the free channels, but it's hard to open the door to new thought. And actually, this is a good thing. Believe it or not, we don't want doctors who influence health and have major health impact swinging from one extreme to another. And that happens sometimes. We all hear about salt is good, salt is not so good, salt is terrible. And then vitamin D, you need a lot of it, but wait a minute, you can get it from the sun. Like, we go through these swings in medicine that are confusing for most people. But this is because science is what it is. We learn one thing and then other groups of scientists have the same kind of outlook. They want to see what the truth is and they find a different result. And that's normal science. So I think it'll take time. But we also live in a different age now where medicine is not necessarily taught by a certain way of thinking, that the internet has made everybody search demons and we can all look for different articles. And depending on kind of what your perspective is, you'll find different search results. So it's interesting to see how modern life is changing medicine.
But on one side of the coin, you see patients on a regular basis. So some of the access and visibility that you get is to real change, where maybe some of those other doctors don't experience that same aspect. So they might be a little more sheltered, right, from what cannabis can do. So can you take our listeners through some of the patients that you see and kind of how it works with cannabis and how you work with them?
Yeah, no, it's a really cool phenomenon that I actually knew nothing about. I mean, I, as a naive medical student and even a provider, would read literature, and I'd kind of apply what I'd learned from the literature to my patients. I wasn't as much a blank slate learning from my patients, but now with my clinic, the CED Clinic, I started on my own because I felt like the clinics I had tried out in cannabis were just a joke. And I'm actually learning from patients. I spend, more than 15 minutes getting to know people, learning from them, learning about their routines. And I've developed this like living laboratory of real people with real concerns and real situations. I've followed them over now 10 years, and I'm learning what's really happening in the world with real products. And that's kind of cutting edge for medical learning. Like I'm finding trends about things like dementia, about things like cancer that are just not even surfacing yet from the medical literature, which is just bonkers. But I get to be on that front line. I'm learning from people that are exploring, kind of going out of their comfort zone to try, high dose cannabis because boy, they've tried everything else and nothing is working. So why not? And then, oh my God, some of them are doing incredibly well with X, Y, or Z. And that's exactly what I put together in the Dr. Approved Cannabis Handbook, this book I wrote. It's just pages and pages of what I've learned from the literature, but also bolstered by the stuff I'm learning from the clinic.
I would imagine, though, there's conversations that when other doctors read some of the work in your book and they have to be blown away at some of the studies that you're doing, some of the findings, do they still have the stigma, or are they more open to it? And then take us through the thought process. They say, hey, Dr. Caplan, like, is that really what happened? Are there like continued conversations, or are they more open to the more nuanced aspects of trying cannabis?
I definitely didn't cure the skepticism of doctors, nor would I want to. Actually, I like that people are skeptical. I like that people have their scruples and say, wait a minute, this goes in the face of what I've learned. And that's part of why I focus not just on medicine. I'm not here to spew science at people. I'm here to point to the history charts and say, look at our politics of the 1930s. Realize that our country was a racist country, that we looked down on people who looked different than us and who did different things. And cannabis laws evolved around a picture that is not, it just doesn't make sense for us today. We know much more. So the full picture, and what interests me, probably what's kept me interested, is not just the science. The science is a slam dunk. And if enough doctors out there read the science, even if they just read the stuff that I've translated, but better, they go to the raw literature, read from both sides of the aisle, they will see a knock you out kind of picture. Cannabis is amazing. It's not good for everything. Nothing is. It's not a panacea. That's not what I'm saying. But compared to the medicines we have now, which all have side effects, which all are appropriate for certain populations, cannabis is a slam dunk. The evidence to support it in many applications, even if it's just for feeling better, even if it's just for sleeping better. But I'm saying more than that, even for specific illnesses, the disease process of certain illnesses like diabetes, cannabis can be amazing. So I haven't cured the skepticism, but I don't want to. I want doctors to be doubtful, to question what they've learned, because you know what? We have all kind of eaten this BS sandwich. We live in a house of cards when it comes to medicine. We sort of go into a doctor's office thinking, oh, this is going to cure me. And then everybody's ticked off when it doesn't work out that way. I think we all have to be a little bit more skeptical, a little bit more patient, and a little bit more open-minded that the solutions we have in front of us may not be the best ones.
I think that's so well said. Do you think, though, that like cannabis is just able to treat this wide array of different diseases and illnesses because the endocannabinoid system is that involved in homeostasis, which is intricate in all these other systems within the body? Or do you think that cannabis just inherently has a diverse chemical profile and all these different substituents are interacting with these different systems? Is there kind of like a current leading theory on that? Like, can you?
Sure. Why is it so great? I'll give you two possible answers, because I don't have the answer. I think so. People need to understand we are all born with cannabis on board. We call it the endocannabinoid system. It's the most widespread communication system in the body. If you haven't heard of the endocannabinoid system, that's as if you haven't heard of serotonin or dopamine or adrenaline. I mean, it's flowing through all of our bodies, touching almost every cell in your body. It is a big deal. And it's also a whole system actor. When we think of medicines, we think of a pill for an ill. Like if your eye, something's wrong with your eye, you need an eye doctor and you need eye medicine. Cannabis is more like exercise or nutrition or sleep. It touches all of the different systems, and some of the benefit it has crosses boundaries of your organs. So you're going to have a kind of natural leveling like you would on a boat, what you're calling an equilibrium or stability or, kind of cross, what was the word you used? Just a kind of adapting to a whole system that levels out some problems. Just like sleep seems to make everything get better, you can think about cannabis. If it's touching all these different systems, if it seems to be leveling out some mismatches, it's going to make everything kind of feel a little bit better. Another way of thinking about it, totally separate, is cannabis as a plant is a freak factory of natural pharmaceuticals. If we could jump behind the counter at Rite Aid or CVS or Walgreens and just put all those pills and creams into a blender, that is very much what cannabis is. It's this plant that's producing tons of different pharmaceuticals. And if your body is missing something, it makes a lot of sense that this kind of mush of stuff is going to fit into what's missing from your body. Does that make sense? I mean, there's sort of different theories that one is everything is leveling in your body. And when you have something that's touching all of your different systems, it's going to make everything kind of more level. And the other is your body, if it's missing something, if you have what we would call now an endocannabinoid deficiency, if we can throw some of the stuff that your body's not producing naturally at you, your body's going to pick that up and it's going to want it.
No, I think that was very clear and very perfectly said. It actually made me want to use more cannabis on a regular basis, just given what you said. But I want to talk about some of the areas that you treat some of your patients. I think there's a lot of people out there that are going to listen to this and they're going to say, hey, doc, that's great, but I don't know where it can help me. Can you just list off some of the experiences that you've seen cannabis help, just to open people's perspectives to what is currently possible?
Sure. The three most common domains where cannabis is used are pain, anxiety, depression, sort of mental health, and then sleeplessness, because those are the conditions that most of us deal with who are alive in modern culture. We're all stressed out. We're all having trouble sleeping to make ends, meet during the daytime. And, from time to time, you're going to have pain. We're all on the way down. None of us gets out of life unscathed from the ravages of time. But there are some other things that people don't know about cannabis that are still important. Like cannabis and sex is a big thing. And sex is a hot topic in the media and the marketing, but it's sometimes a shy thing to come up between a patient and doctor. But cannabis can be remarkable for bad sex, whether it's one partner feeling anxious or another partner not feeling satisfied out of the experience. There's a whole lot of opportunity in the bedroom where cannabis can be really helpful. And there aren't so many great options. I mean, we know about the blue pill and we know about stuff that's kind of very male-centric. But cannabis, thankfully, is very female-centric. It's working for women to feel more physically comfortable as women reach menopause. It helps them, with body physiology, but also comfort levels. It makes everybody feel more comfortable. So there are things about cannabis that are kind of very unique to certain domains, but there's also stuff that touches all of us for common things too.
How does one who's looking for a specific product know if it will help them for pain, for sex, for sleeping? Given all the plethora of different products, different product forms, how do you go about recommending a product who's new to try, who's interested in one, but walks into a dispensary and he's like, here's 100 products?
So, Brian, your question reveals your bias and the way that we've all been taught about medicine. That, wait a minute, where is the eye medicine for my eye problem? I think the solution to medicine is actually focusing on the person first. What is this person like? What are they looking for out of a medicine? In this book, I broke down the decision into sort of three major choices. The first choice is about timing. Some products work very quickly. They have an effect now. Other products tend to work for a whole long day, and you have a kind of foundation through a whole day. You probably want control over your life and knowing what's happening to you this instant, whether it's a cushion through the day or something that's affecting you instantly. That's starting with you, not the product. Second decision is about alteration. Some people are just can't deal with being high. They're worried about it. They're afraid of it for whatever reason. They don't want to be altered. And you know what? There are plenty of choices on totally not altered and totally altered, and spectrums between those extremes. So that's an important decision that someone has to make before they even consider products. So decision number 1 was about timing. Decision number 2 about alteration. Decision 3 is sort of the energy involved. Some of the cannabis products are stimulating, they're activating, they're like a cup of coffee and get you up, really revved up with energy. And other selections of products are the opposite. They're more helping you unwind, calm down, relax, maybe better sleep. Those are total extremes that you don't want to mess up when you're thinking about your medicine and what you're looking for. So all of these 3 decisions are about you and what you're looking for. And as you're, dealing with, say, depression, you might want to have something that's going to work right away. When you're down, you don't want to be too down. But you also might want to have something that's a cushion through the day to lift you up totally through the day. So that's a very personal decision. You also might want something that's not going to mess with your workday because, boy, you can't risk that. You want to have something that'll help you unwind at night. That's a time decision that's personal. And then third, you may be sick of feeling depressed all the time, and having a little levity, even if it's artificial, is kind of okay. Like, it's just a nice balance to what you're used to. So I'm talking all about one particular product, but I haven't even mentioned the product yet. This is all focused on what someone needs. So that's, I think, the orientation that has to change. And I walk my patients through what their choices are, what their preferences are, and then I match them to certain products that are out there.
Is there certain illnesses where there's a dose threshold, if you will, right? Say someone's coming in for treatment of, say, cancer or something similar, where there's actually a known metabolic pathway that requires a certain amount of the cannabinoid in the blood to facilitate that action. So is there certain minimum thresholds where you're hey, you have to have this much, but then we follow this kind of critique? Is that kind of a approach you typically take?
Yeah, totally. So we in medicine think about that as a sort of trigger versus tone. That certain dose of a medicine will trigger a downstream effect. Like if we can tickle some of the cells in your brain, those cells produce a compound which then cascades to other systems that produce more and more of a certain compound that your body needs. That's different than having a tone in your body where, say, you have 10,000 pieces of cancer, you want 10,000 pieces of cannabis to attack them because they only work on a one-by-one kind of way. There are certain conditions like cancer where we see at the front lines, I'm seeing patients who take small doses and they feel much better. And for symptom management, that's great. Chemotherapy is vile, and the social sort of structural changes to someone's life as they're losing their hair and feeling like they're going to die are just awful. So smaller doses tend to be really effective for them to help them feel like life can be managed and worth living. But that's very different than approach, which is, I want to kill cancer. I want poison to cancer, like chemotherapy, but I also don't want to die from the effects of too much chemotherapy. I mean, that's one of the downsides of modern chemotherapy, is that if you take too much, it is poison for all the actively replicating cells in your body. And you can really hurt yourself with too much chemotherapy. It has to be fine-tuned within reason. But what we see about cannabis killing cancer is that cannabis, because it's affecting the communication system of these cells, the normal cells and the cancer cells, it cues our natural immune system to fight the cancer cells and leaves the normal cells untouched. That in study after study, when people or mice or petri dishes are looking at models of cannabis and cancer, they see normal cells untouched and they see the cancer cells either dying, like auto-destructing. We have a process called apoptosis in the body, or they stop growing. And that can be because the cannabis is stopping blood vessels from growing and feeding new cancers. We also have other studies that show cannabis stops cancer from busting through its own tissues and traveling to other places, becoming metastatic. These are separate studies that all show positive benefits of cannabis. But people, in our culture are still kind of worried about cannabis and this evil thing. And there's so much stigma that doctors won't even take it seriously. Patients are afraid to look it up. So here I am trying to scream it from mountaintops.
Did something like that surprise you? And if so, like, what do you think is necessary in order to get those other doctors to open their eyes to what could potentially be a very good offer for cancer?
Yeah, no, my God, I am continually flabbergasted every day. I mean, I talk to people and they're like, oh my God, Dr. Caplan, this has saved my life. Why isn't this out there? And I'm like, oh God, what can I do to get this out there? Like, I'll try a podcast, I'll try newsletters, I'll try writing a book. I'm doing as much as I can think of to get this message out there. You know, I'm a crazy doctor that I'm able to think outside the box. A lot of doctors are trained to do well on tests, to study literature, to read guidelines and kind of abide by them. I'm almost the opposite. I kind of don't belong in the box. I constantly question what's around me. I question the stuff that I've been taught. I question the stuff I hear. I'm curious. It comes from a place of curiosity more than kind of anything else. But that's a weird combination in me. And I think doctors out there just have to be pushed by their patients, people they know and trust. So all of the people listening out there, you know, if you're experiencing something positive, challenge your doctor. I mean, that's the relationship as it should be, is patients teaching their doctor what's working from them. And, you know, hopefully the doctor's open-minded enough to listen. You know, if doctors who don't listen to their patients probably want to know that anyway and kind of vote with their feet.
Before you mentioned dementia and not being in literature, can you share some information about is there early findings that you think are really promising? And what else can you share about that?
Sure. I mean, dementia is a big black box. And, you know, my dad, I was mentioning before, this famous neurologist doesn't believe in the term dementia. You know, it's sort of a broad, non-specific term that things are kind of falling apart and breaking down and is not very useful diagnostically. But what I see is I have categories of patients who we would call having dementia: people with Alzheimer's, people with Parkinson's disease, people with Lewy body dementia and other forms. I see remarkable results when they're using cannabis. I have one Parkinson's patient, actually, that's in the book. He used to be a ballet dancer, and he was nervous because he wasn't going to be able to dance at his daughter's wedding. And he came to me and we designed a routine for him that made him feel so fluid. And one of the issues with Parkinson's is they get very rigid, but he was able to dance at his daughter's wedding. It was a huge success. And this was a treatment I'd never conceived of in medical school, certainly never saw in training. So it's an example like that where, my God, this has to get out there. Like, I don't quite understand what's happening. I know that there is literature that points to it and shows what I'm saying on paper, but it's not enough for most doctors to feel comfortable with that. So it's sort of this weird infancy of medicine where it comes to cannabis that just has to go through its growing pains and reach the right audience.
When you have this conversation with your dad about it, what is his perspective on it? Have you seen him kind of shift through your experience as well?
Totally. That's a great question, because my dad is, you know, thankfully, like me, very evidence driven, and he reads the papers and he doesn't really care if society thinks one way or the other. He wants to see what the literature is. He wants to try it out with his patients. And he, of course, trusts me and my perspective. So he's read what I've written quite critically and helped me kind of translate things. But he has been remarkably in favor of cannabis even before I was, because he had read the literature and knew about it before I did. So he never once dissuaded me. He always has supported me. And people look up to him to translate complicated science in the way that I've kind of learned how to do too. So I think, you know, in many ways, I'm blessed to have his model and to follow in his footsteps in a different domain.
I mean, it's super cool, right? From a neurological perspective, like, it's obvious that ingesting cannabis causes a direct effect, neurologically speaking, right? Like, it interacts with the nervous system. So like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's are diseases of the nervous system. So there's got to be some sort of interaction there. Could you kind of just talk us through some of the current like studies that are being executed to try to like tease out what's going on there and why there is some sort of success from treatment like you were just describing?
So, Callan, I think with that, we'd put the audience to sleep. But let me give you
just the three of us.
Let me give you two other neurological phenomena I think are more interesting. The short answer is the research is pointing to very nuanced cellular level changes that I think is way over the head of most people.
You could just say is it like an equilibrium, or is it more like a lock and key situation? And we'll leave it at that.
So it's not that easy. It's a different understanding. So at a nerve level, what cannabis does is kind of slow signaling transmission. So if you have hand pain, what's going on is you have cells in your hand that are transmitting a signal saying this hurts. Mm-hmm. And that signal translates from the site of pain down your arm into your spinal cord and back into your brain. So there's kind of multiple places where one could interact and slow the signal down. Like if you think about a stereo, it's kind of turning the volume down.
Yeah.
So that happens with a topical cannabis cream at the site of transmission. So if you had a cut, you could theoretically put cannabis around the cut and slow the signal of pain being received by the local receptors.
Okay.
Separately, you could have systemic cannabis, a cannabis you consume some other way that gets into your whole system instead of just one region. And that will kind of slow all of those nerve signals being translated up the chain. And then separately, you can have cannabis that's reaching your brain, and there's a totally different effect. All of these are part of the nervous system, and all of them tend to be slowing down the signal transfer. But I'm going to give you an opposite effect of cannabis too, which makes it really cool and also very confusing for people. If we put you in a functional imaging machine, if we're looking at what's active in your brain, literally lights on a screen over your anatomy, what we see when people are without cannabis is a light in a certain area. Like say I'm showing you a TV show or you're listening to a podcast, I can see in your brain what areas are lit up. If we put you in that machine and you have cannabis on board, what we see is whole other areas of your brain also lit up. It's almost like we spiced the whole brain and there's much more cross communication between lots of different areas. Or if we were to use 60s, 70s language, it's mind expanding, man. You know, like there's learning that we actually derive from the culture that we have to pay attention to. We've kind of ignored, but there's knowledge and wisdom there that I get to kind of figure out and piece together on the outside. So anyway, with the nerve signaling stuff and with this kind of broad activation stuff, what we see is kind of the body almost resetting or restarting in ways that can evolve around pain. And as someone's consuming cannabis over time with pain in their hand, for example, they don't develop as much pain acutely. So right now they're not feeling as much pain, but over time, those pain signals actually kind of get ignored and the body becomes habituated. You know, we develop a tolerance to that pain and start to ignore it. And conversely, in the brain, when you have that kind of universal activation, new pathways can be formed. And that's why people feel like cannabis is so helpful for creativity. And so many of the famous artists and scientists of, you know, history have consumed cannabis, is that it does activate new areas. It's mind expanding.
That has to be an aha moment for people. I'm sorry, John, I'm going for it.
No, go ahead.
That has to be an aha moment when people see that, right? If you can see on the screen it lighting up, if there's no longer of like, hey, does this help it or not? It has to be the aha moment. Have you taken people in to show them that? And was that the moment where they were like, wow?
I mean, I could do that. And I could show the images that are publicly available about cancer reduction. There's glioblastoma as a brain cancer, and there's plenty of other brain cancers where we see a tennis ball turn into a dime-sized nothing. And it's just because of cannabis. This person wasn't on anything else. They've consumed cannabis at a certain dosage that was right for them in the right frequencies. So it's not magic dust. It's a routine that's routine over time. But yeah, there's so many moments where I'm like, my God, this has changed everything I understand about medicine. But if you step back and consider, we have all grown up with a medical understanding that was missing a gigantic piece right in the middle. We didn't understand that there was an endocannabinoid system, that it touched every single system in the body. So without that, of course, there are going to be holes. And I get to see these holes firsthand. It's just amazing.
Is it all forms of cancer or only certain forms?
Well, not all forms have been studied, but most of the forms we've seen, pancreatic cancer, brain cancer, certain organ cancers. I have patients in my office who had neural sheath tumors. These are nerves around, you know, areas that run to your fingers. Those just shrank with topicals. Like it's a wide spectrum of cancers. It seems to be a phenomenon about cancer itself. And so let me dive into this. We all, and terrify your audience, we all develop close to 5,000 cancers a day. That's why we have T cells in our body. When you hear about AIDS patients and HIV, their T cell counts are low. It's because we worry about their T cells being able to fight their own battles. And when you have cells that are messed up, your T cells tag those cells to be destroyed.
And so your immune system essentially is fighting cancer on a daily basis. And when you get
right. So
daily life
yes.
stresses.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I got you.
Okay, we can cut that out.
I'm freaked out.
So we all produce about 5,000 mistakes a day. And when when cannabis is on board, it creates another avenue of support for your immune system. When cancers are small enough, your immune system can find them, tag them, and kill them. When those cancers start producing compounds that attract blood vessels to them, that's when the cancer becomes really dangerous. It can grow really big. It can travel to new areas of your body. So what you need to help stop that or prevent that is called anti-angiogenesis. That's the stopping of blood vessel growth. And guess what? All of vegetation and fruit on Earth, they are anti-angiogenic. Cannabis, as a microcosm for vegetation on Earth, is very anti-angiogenic. So as people are consuming more and more cannabis, it's preventing those blood vessels from connecting with those microcancers that we all produce, and it's helping people prevent and stop cancers from growing.
Seems like what we've got is an apple a day keeps the doctor away, and smoke weed every day have now merged into one.
Or maybe laughter is a better medicine, and we didn't understand why laughter is good medicine, but now we're starting to understand that, wait a minute, this is part of our body's mechanism for healing itself.
Pretty wild how much we don't know about the human body.
All right, I got to dive into a quote that I read on your blog. Cannabis is the Swiss Army knife of skincare treatments, while other skin medicines are individual knives. Is it true CBD cream is an alternative to sunscreen?
It is. And that's one of the hidden gems in the book that I didn't really announce very heavily. I actually wrote a regular sunscreen blog recently and didn't even include cannabis there. The shape of the cannabis molecule is a lot like a shield, physically like a shield. And when you're consuming something, people don't really get the physics of when you're eating medicine. It's actually floating through your blood vessels and through your veins. And of course, this makes sense, but we think about it sort of, it's at the key or it's at the destination, but we don't think about the traveling. But as you're someone who's consuming cannabis routinely, I'm talking about systemic cannabis, not just topical, the UV light that hits us at all times from everything around us, we're surrounded by radiation and sunlight, that energy will interact with the cannabis and it will literally physically be shielded. So that bolt of UV energy will not be then damaging some of your cells. If you happen to use a cream of that shield around your hand, well, guess what? That's going to have extra protection, lots more shields preventing the sun and UV light from damaging that area.
Any type of CBD cream, like how, if I want to go try that, is that just one where, how do I know if I'm selecting the right type of product to combat?
So you're asking step 3 and 4. I'm still.
I'm going to go out there. I'm swapping sunscreen out now. Going forward. No, maybe my moisturizers.
So that's one of the cool things about cannabis, actually, is that it. Wait a minute. It seems to have this Swiss Army knife effect. It's good for inflammation. It's good for maybe protecting against the sun. It seems to be, doing all these nice things. It smells nice. It has other components too. We don't know exactly which ones. We don't know kind of. What's to look for. But from my perspective, I'm describing the shape of the molecule for both CBD and THC. They're almost identical, actually. Not a lot of people know that, but we have this dramatic difference in our culture that CBD is totally legal, THC is totally illegal, but it's only one tiny part of that molecule that's very different. And it just shows how little politicians and governors know, as opposed to science, that these two, one is legal, one isn't.
That little difference, though, does have substantial impact on the pharmacokinetic standpoint, right?
No, fair enough. Yeah. But if someone is consuming CBD in an acid form, like say your stomach, those are interchangeable. And we have evidence that shows CBD actually does turn into THC. And in real life, truckers and people who are on Department of Transportation testing say, wait a minute, I've been taking CBD. Why did I test positive for THC? This stuff actually happens all the time. But it doesn't make sense for us to have a system where only one is legal and the other isn't. It's ridiculous.
What has impressed you most about cannabis so far?
How much I think cannabis has laid bare what we don't know. I, even through medical school, had so much confidence in the medical establishment and, that what we knew was complete. And I sort of heard about, doctors should be humble and they should kind of be reverent to skepticism, as we were discussing before. But I never really saw the holes as clearly as I do with my patients in cannabis. That I have patients with fibromyalgia, with uncontrolled diabetes, with dementia, with cancer, who feel like the system just doesn't work for them. And plenty of patients, even normal kind of non-extreme cases like depression and anxiety and sleeplessness. And in my mind, I'm seeing all of these holes through my patients and realizing, wait a minute, all of these holes are exactly part of the endocannabinoid system. And this is the system that medicine doesn't quite tap into. So it feels like I see the hole and I see the thing which can fill that hole, this kind of forms of cannabis. But then I also see a culture that throws spaghetti on the wall, and people think cannabis is just buy whatever makes you high or what smells good or what looks good in packaging. And imagine going into CVS or whatever and picking what smells good or what looks good on the packaging. Like, we don't treat medicine that way at all. So there's something about guided cannabis where getting to know someone's illnesses, I can help them as a physician, but I have a new tool that I didn't have before. That's just so special and really remarkable.
For those who are still hesitant, listening, but very curious, what would you like them to know?
I think educate yourself. Knowledge really is the best power. That's where I spend most of my effort. I'm not a doctor who's a dictator or a commander. I don't tell my patients what to do. I give them knowledge and I share with them suggestions and recommendations, and then I learn from them. So I think depending on where someone's coming from, they're going to find choices that work for them, and only they know that path. So it's up to me to kind of tease that out and help them feel more comfortable, either with knowledge and pointing to the scoreboard of literature or my own experience and what's worked for other people. But I kind of humanize the process. So for people that want knowledge, I put out as many resources as I can find. For people that want personal guidance, I have a clinic where I see patients from all walks of the earth. All of this stuff, of course, crosses borders. So it's not about the state medical system. Knowledge crosses everywhere. And I can teach people as far as Israel and Sudan, down here to the United States and all states, in between.
What's your opinion on recreational use?
I think all of cannabis is therapeutic. I think we look through a lens of judgment, and that's passed down by our predecessors. That we should judge people who are consuming cannabis and feeling good. Again, point to history. We live in a puritanical culture. Cannabis was used by priests and the religious community for ages. And it was kept there because it was special. It was giving people certain experiences that were godly or felt godly. If you look back to the archaeochemistry, we have evidence that people were consuming cannabis and psychedelics for tens of thousands of years. Like, this is not a new thing. So recreational, I think, is great. I think everybody should have levity and feel good and enjoy their lives. If they feel like it's cheating somehow to use an external substance, I would disabuse them of that silliness. I think we don't feel bad enjoying a piece of art or enjoying a delicious piece of food. We shouldn't enjoy medicine. We shouldn't feel bad about enjoying medicine. I also think all cannabis is medicinal. That no matter who you are, life is a struggle, and nobody has a get out of jail card from the struggles of life. And it's just a matter of picking and choosing which things you want to address in the time we have left. And cannabis is a great solution for a lot of different people if you have guidance, if you have someone who knows what they're doing and can walk you through it.
What is the number one surprise or shocking fact or statistic in the Dr. Approved Cannabis Handbook when you first showed somebody the book and they read it and they said, wow, Dr. Caplan, I can't believe that?
Yeah, I think people are often surprised by how complex things are. We have a medical system that tries to keep things simple. You have a headache, here's a headache medicine, sort of like what we were talking about before. But in my sleep chapter, I put in a questionnaire that is sort of like a Cosmo questionnaire for teens, but goes through sleep. And the kinds of things that affect our sleep are numerous and really cross borders. Your environment, of course, your pillows, your blankets, your mattress, but also whether you exercise that day, that will affect your sleep. The foods that you eat, the person next to you, the fact that you have your cell phone, which might be ringing at any moment, affects your sleep. So what cannabis has helped me do is realize that we don't know everything, and that actually the full puzzle is really complex. I've seen patients and given them the same cannabis recommendation, but it worked for one, but not for the other. And what I do as a scientist is say, okay, wait a minute, what about their history made this one work, but not that one? And I've learned over time that, it was because they had their cell phone in their room or because they have a TV on to help them go to sleep. So I craft what I think is a whole I guess, the holistic view of sleep, that it's not just, oh, this one didn't have cannabis and this one did, or this one didn't have Ambien and this one did. It's a full view of what's going on at home. And I think sometimes doctors have forgotten to do that. We all have this idea that doctors can cure everything with a pill. And sometimes, we want a pill. Like I have trouble sleeping, give me something to fix it. But it sometimes takes a doctor to say, wait a minute, it's not just a chemical problem, it's also an environmental one.
If I gave you a magic wand or money or ethics is no issue, what would you study?
I would study what I am doing, actually, which is older adults. We, as we get older, all have a endocannabinoid system which wanes. It gets weaker as time goes on. And that's partly due to immune system. We all have a more fragile immune system as time goes on. Our body breaks down. But we see that people are less happy as time goes on. They feel more lonely, of course, because those around them are dying and becoming sick. But studying older adults and learning how the endocannabinoid system can be boosted is a source of really universal benefit. All of us are going to get older. The population that's growing the fastest is the older population. So I want to really pull them out as a separate entity and help them individually, because I think some of the solutions are unique.
What question do you wish more people asked you?
How can I help my doctor learn about cannabis? I am not afraid to teach doctors. I'm not shy about teaching them. I'm not about me. It's not about me as a person. I'm pointing to my work and the work that's published. And I wish more people felt comfortable challenging the system, because we have a system that's meant to work for us. And if we don't benefit, we are the only ones to blame. We like to blame, there's a shortage of doctors, not enough doctors out there. And that's true. We like to blame pharmaceutical companies. They're making all the money and not producing enough drugs. But I think we all here listening and participating have a responsibility to take power and control in our hands and do what we can to improve. And in this case, it's teaching doctors what can do better.
Is that a conversation where someone like myself asks my doctor, hey, have you looked into cannabis as a therapy, or can cannabis help me here? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, so the in-office experience should be, hey, doctor, I have questions about cannabis. Are you comfortable with helping me with my health when it comes to cannabis? Because the doctor's job, or a nurse practitioner, a PA's job, is to help you on your terms. They're actually not supposed to make decisions for you. They're supposed to do combined joint decision-making. So asking them first if they're comfortable with cannabis, and if they're not, say, why not? It's okay to question the knowledge of someone who has your health in their hands. And if they are comfortable, hey, here's my experience. What can you guide me with? Or who do you know that you can refer me to if you don't know?
Perfect.
It's pretty basic, but it's still very hard for a lot of people. We feel shy that we're going to get in trouble talking about it.
No, I think it's super helpful, and one that I definitely think it can be explored. So last question for you is, who do you think is perfect for the Dr. Approved Cannabis Handbook? And if they're listening, who can pick that up?
Sure. So it's I wrote it for everybody. I see a pediatric population that isn't addressed in this book, and I really wish I did. I think that'll wait till volume 2. But this is for people who are curious about cannabis, want to understand it in simple terms, and want to keep their skepticism. They want this to be evidence-based, because every single claim in this book is backed with a reference in the back. This is not trust the doctor. This is, here is the evidence, here's the work that went into it, and here's a translation of it. So it's right for everybody. In terms of where to get it, it's everywhere books are sold. The libraries now across the country have this book attached to it. The libraries have this book in stock. Of course, Amazon has it, and I have signed copies that I actually personalize for people on my websites. So if people are interested, it's Caplan Cannabis, CAPLAN cannabis.com. But anytime you can learn more and help yourself, you'll thank yourself later.
I appreciate taking the time. This was a lot of fun.